Well, good morning, everyone. This is Mel Clemente, your presenter for today's webinar. We'll be talking about displaying status in a progress bar today, and we'll talk mostly about workflows too and how you can showcase its progress, like how you're seeing here. So I hope you're as excited as I am. And without further ado, let's start the webinar. All right, today's agenda will be tackling about these three items. First, we'll add a progress bar to improve our form's usability, and we'll do it quickly. By quickly, I mean less than 5 minutes, because we have this XTP for you that I created. You're going to simply add it into your form and go through the 5 steps to customize it. But depending on the complexity of your workflow, you might need to do more logic work later. But at least you don't have to worry about the progress bar itself because it's all there in the XTP. And because it's an XTP, it is reusable. You can use it multiple times in your different forms, however you want. And we built it with CSS. So we all know how powerful CSS is when designing all things web. And with Forms Viewer's great technology today, we can now integrate CSS and design away, put our creative minds into work and say goodbye to old boring forms. And then later I'll be showing you how in one of our customer forms, I've designed some of the status buttons to be actually clickable. So then the workflow progresses to the next state on click. Before we dive into all that, we should first know why we should use progress bars, right? So progress bars are not the most exciting thing in the world, but they are powerful. You see them every day when you're on your computer, like when your screen is loading, when you're downloading something, or even watching a video or listening to a song. They're meant to do all these things that you see on screen right now, communicate progress, because a progress bar shows you how much progress you've made and how much left you must make to set expectations. So that way you'll show transparency between the sort of sender and the receiver, which in our case, admins and users. So we try to give the impression of the activities going on in a transaction, or again, in our case, workflows. And because they are out there on the display, they're usually visually appealing to please the audience, delight them, and while they wait for the progress to actually move forward, for your form to progress, right? So here's some samples of progress bars that you'd see on the web today. The top ones from Amazon. Here's one from Crate and Barrel. So most of these you see when you're placing an order or checking out or filling out registration forms. They're there with the goals that we just talked about, communicating progress, setting expectations, and all that stuff. But again, because we are form designers, we deal with forms. We're more involved with things like approval workflows, forms that can be in a submitted state, approved or rejected or reviewed. So here's a slide showing how we typically show status in our forms today. It's just right there, no progress bars whatsoever, plain old Jane showing the text status. You put some colors, all right. But yeah, so why not make it more exciting? So then one of our customers asked us to build the form that has this cool progress bar showing workflow status. And we did just that. And here it goes. So here you'll see this progress bar and indicating different workflow states, and green meaning it's done, and the last arrow, sort of arrow here, is the current status and the ones that are yet to be done. So Pete, one of our customer from DCS, has been our inspiration in coming up with this technique, and he's here with us to talk about more about this form and give a quick testimonial. Pete?
Hi, Mel. I presume you can hear me okay?
I can. You sound great. Thanks.
Okay, great. Yeah, so the inspiration for this is pretty much what you had already indicated. What was important for this client was that there be progress over time. And the users in this particular case were relatively new, right? So they didn't have a good understanding of what this process was. So like a lot of those examples you put up there, where people are kind of coming new to a process, this was important, I thought, to the users in order to kind of understand where they were and over time be able to see their progress. Because in this particular case, one of the attributes of this workflow is that it goes on over a fairly long period of time. It's not, you know, a very short process like, you know, you can get it done in a couple of minutes, right? This goes on over days, weeks, or even months. So it's important that they have a sense of where they are in the process. And because to them it was a relatively new process, something that they hadn't really done before, I thought this progress bar was going to be really important to understanding where they were overall. And you know, as you know, Mel, I put together that sort of graphic of what was in my head, and then just kind of threw it over to you and let you go crazy with that. And you did obviously a beautiful job here, not only in the functionality, because that was another, you know, curveball that I threw to you about the end buttons, right? You know, making those two buttons on the end be actual functional buttons, which I thought, was a really cool way to handle it. And the users don't really have to get involved in that process. And that's why I thought that, you know, the progress bar is doing exactly what we wanted it to do. It's showing the user overall where they are, but then the admin who deals with this on a, you know, very regular basis, kind of day in, day out, could use that bar very easily as it's just push button. They don't have to dive deep into these things because we got the phase column right there for them. They can just go, okay, all of them are done, boom, push that all CAPA's approved button on the end and be done with it.
Right.
So great job overall. I couldn't be more happy. I know the client is very happy, so win-win all around.
I'm really happy to hear that, Pete, and I'm glad you're liking the solution so far. And again, you have been the inspiration for us to do this. Without your idea, I wouldn't have put this all together. So thank you. All right. Thanks for a wonderful. Huh? All right.
My pleasure.
So let's move on to our next slide here. So yeah, with that, all right, with that behind, I'm gonna just wanna show you or talk about some tips, share some tips with you about the workflow logic design that I myself have been using in almost all the solutions, all the forms that I build. So here I have just top 4, but there are a couple more that we can talk about along the way. So first, this using step numbers instead of static status labels. Workflows can have a million different status labels, but what they all have in common are, guess what? Step numbers, right? So build your form logic around leveraging these step numbers. That way you can control things more dynamically and you don't end up having a bunch of rules with condition for each and every status name. For example, you can go with current step is less than 3, then, you know, hide these buttons, hide these sections. You got to use the less than there because you're dealing with a number. Instead of doing something like status equals submitted, then do this. If status equals approved, then do that. Later on, when you decide to change that status label's name, then you're going to have, you know, you're going to end up with a little trouble there looking for things everywhere, right? But again, depending on the complexity of your workflow, you might still need to create a rule that requires specifying the status name, at least maybe a substring of it, something like if the status name contains user or contains admin, something that involves an assignee, for example. So yeah, you might have to do it maybe once or twice, but at least you saved yourself some time and effort there, right? So next is to build a separate XML with a repeating structure. And let me show you what I mean by that. So the solution that we build for Pete and almost all the workflow integrated forms that I built have been using this kind of XML structure for the workflow. So here you'll see I have the main workflow section and a repeating workflow node within that, right? And in each node, I have the step number that we talked about. In each step, I state what the status label would be. So we go from draft to submitted to in review, approved, processed, and closed. This is just the generic workflow. Yep. And then lots of benefits here, actually. Not only would you be covered from the hassles of status labels again, but you can also place objects on your canvas like form controls, much lesser, right? So that's actually how I built the buttons for customer form, for Pete's form that we showed earlier. That's in a repeating section. Later, I'm going to show you more about that. All right, so moving on to tip number 3 here. From that XML, you can actually build a workflow config form that is accessible by admin. So let's show you something like that. Again, here's one from our customer forms. So here you see this is a config form that shows the workflow phases. We have the status column over here, steps you can see the step numbers. I'm gonna go ahead and edit this. And here I made it available. This is only for admins, obviously. So again, this is from that XML structure that I showed you earlier, only we're displaying it in a user-friendly way, in a UI, in an actual UI that admins can edit without having to go through the text editor and understanding what, those kind of complications. So here we specify the steps, the status, we even have some definitions going on. And we went further with this, giving like permission roles who can put this doc into what state and whatnot. And the solution also involves sending emails after a state moves forward. So we also can specify the email recipient. So here again, we're using a repeating structure. So I hope you also get yourselves familiar with how this technique goes. And if you ever need assistance or even tutorials, maybe we can provide training, because this is really the best way I've been dealing with complex workflows. Right. So, yeah. So again, those action buttons that we showed you with Pete's form, that's in a repeating table. We practiced this one in our central flow solution, which I'm going to try to show next here. If you're familiar with the central flows solution that we've been building, I'm going to have to refresh this form again here. So here's another config form. This time, we're also adding buttons. So instead of just a one, like in the XML you're seeing here, this doesn't have the buttons, only the step and the status. But if we look here, you're going to think about this is step 1, the start, step 2, the submitted. And then underneath or within each of these statuses, we have buttons. So I can actually have more than 2 buttons here. So what's happening here in step 2, where the form is submitted, I want to show the approve and reject buttons, if that makes sense, right? So then you can control the conditional formatting. You can just display a one button in a repeating section that has a conditional formatting. If current step is not equal to 2, right? Because we're using step numbers, or if you don't want to do that, if step or status is not equal to submitted, then hide all the rest of the buttons except this current rows buttons, all right? So I hope you're getting that. I hope that's making sense, but yeah, those are all the top 4 tips that I would give you. And we're going to, aside from the other demo forms that I've already showed you, I'm going to show you the XTP next, because we want to make your lives easier. So I built this XTP reusable template part that you can add into your forms. We have only 5 steps, just like I said. And it's just this tiny little section here that is bound to a secondary data source, the workflows, the XML that I showed you. And we're using a repeating section with, you'll see 2 buttons here. Why? Because the first section here is the one showing the completed steps, if I'm correct here, hide if completed. Yeah, these are the completed steps, and these are the non-completed steps. So if we go back to the form here, so all that you see in green are coming from the first section, and all that you see in gray are coming from the bottom section, this one here. So we have the conditional formatting, hide if not completed, hide if completed. So you're seeing just one button there, but how come they are appearing as in a row? Because usually if you do a repeating section or a table in InfoPath, they go by, top to bottom. Here we're showing it horizontally, right? Why? Because of the CSS. If we inspect this in the Chrome inspector here, 1 second, can you go here? All right, so here is the CSS that we're using behind the scenes and specifying the colors up there. You can change the colors because we're going to ship the XDP. It comes with these colors by default. You can change these however you want. It uses the flex, which is a modern CSS technique. That's why it's showing horizontally there. If I try and like maybe let me try this. Did that? Look what happens. It just gets stacked vertically. So we want it to show like so. So we use flex there. And it's not that easy if you thought it would, if you think it's easy here, let me show you the arrows here because it's a button, right? And normally buttons would just show rectangular appearance, but this we're showing the arrowheads, and for that we're using the before and after selectors. And here there's no content. I'm just controlling the borders to instead show the entire green shading there, change the borders to transparent so that they would look like, triangles, like arrowheads there. So some CSS magic. And again, because we're in Forms Viewer, we're able to do that. We're able to use code in our forms using, resource files and what have you. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. Let me go back to here to my XDP and make sure that I've covered at least the basics that you need to understand in using this XDP, because I really want you to get out there and start using progress bars in your form. So yeah, just a couple of steps here. You're gonna want to go to the XDP logic here, change some rules. And again, this is just a matter of, because we don't want you going through re-injecting key rules and whatnot. So we prepared all these rules for you so you can just rebind things. If you add this into your form, you're going to have a Qdabra rule secondary data source. You're just going to need to change this stop field to point to your command node and all that. So it's all really easy. You just have to go through these 5 steps. And then down here comes notes, because what complicates the usage of this is not actually the XDP usage itself, but your scenario, your workflow scenario, because your scenario can have a complex workflow involved, right? I kind of try to approach or try to address those kind of different scenarios. But basically here, I'm telling you that for your submit buttons or any buttons that you have, for example, approve or reject, you just want to add rules to increment your step, because we're using step again. I only have one field here in the main data source. So in that submit button, add a rule to increment the step by 1 to move forward, right, before your actual submit. So that's that. And if you ever have a reject button or a withdraw or return, then you just need to decrement it, go back. And again, you might have scenarios where your step or your workflow needs to go back more than once. So that's all up to you to customize the logic. And again, we're here. We're always here to help you if you ever need assistance. But you're going to get this XDP for free as part of the webinar package. All right, that was short but sweet, I hope. Any questions for me? Let me see. Let me check my questions box. I don't seem to have any, and I see familiar faces here. Thank you, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's demo, and let us know if you need assistance having progress bars in your forms. They are, again, very powerful. All right, let me see. I get a chat here. That's from Pete. No questions. So I assume you all get what I've talked about, what I've babbled about today. But I'm sure you're gonna have some if you start tinkering with the XDP that we will ship. So I'll let you play around that. And all of you here seems to be using Forms Viewer. You know its power. You know that we're continuing to improve it, to build it. We have mobile support. Those of you who doesn't have Forms Viewer yet, go ahead and explore it. It's gonna make your life a lot easier, not only as the developers or the form designers, but also give pleasant experience to your users. So let us know if you have any questions, or if you need anything at all, you can contact us at support at qdabra.com. All right, guys, and with that, I end this webinar. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for attending. Take care, everyone.